And we are live. So welcome viewers, welcome listeners to this still yet unnamed solo project of mine. My name is Brook Potter, originally from the Twin Island nation of Trinidad and Tobago. Moved out here 2 years ago to the United Kingdom, and I've been making a life for myself out here. And one of the things people who might follow me know, I do categorize myself as a libertarian. And one of the things I was looking forward to when I finally got to the UK was being a part of an authentic libertarian movement. Now, I mean, that phrase has a lot of meanings. So I'm going to discuss, and we're going to have a discussion today about what that means, especially in the UK context. And at one of the first meetings that I attended, I had the privilege of listening to this absolutely fabulous speaker, of whom he and I have become quite good friends since that time. My friend Dan Liddicott, who is joining me for this stream today. So Dan, how are you doing today?
Hi, Brooke. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing okay. It's been a busy day today, but it's a real pleasure to be on your podcast. And good to see you again. You're looking good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. As are you. I'm loving the flag. I mean, is there somewhere people could pick up the flag? What's going on?
You know what? I should do a roaring trade in Libertarian Party flags. I have been asked for them repeatedly by one member in particular, and I'm very sorry. I haven't got a new stock yet. But so they're not on the shop, they're not on the party shop, but they hopefully will be soon. Fingers crossed.
Fantastic. I think when I did join, I got the pin and the member. I still haven't got my new membership card, so I'll have to have a chat with the membership committee about that. But yeah. So Dan, I mean, you know, you are definitely somebody that I had a lot of respect for. I mean, the first time I heard you was probably 2 years ago at the annual general meeting for the Libertarian Party, and I was really captivated, and I followed a lot of your work. So could you tell the listeners a little bit about where you came from? I mean, I'm assuming you weren't always a libertarian.
No, I wasn't. And of course, I could blame a lot of things for that, not least of all the state school system, which is very good at drilling people with leftist ideology. But that would be unfair, because I remember a lot of my teachers fondly, and they taught me to think critically. A lot of them. It was the early days of the national curriculum. It hadn't fully set in yet. So,
right.
But in reality, I probably didn't really start getting political until I became a student. And to my shame, I can confess to having voted for every major party at least once.
Does that include Lib Dem?
Like a little spectrum of me growing up, right? Yeah. He votes Lib Dem. Okay, nice. Then he votes Labour because he foolishly believed what Tony Blair said, and immediately found him to be less than authentic. Then he votes Tory. Then he votes UKIP. And then he realizes libertarianism, and there isn't anyone to vote for in my area, so I'm going to have to stand.
About time we had you front and center. Definitely. And when you said that in the schools, sorry,
go on.
No, I said in the school system. I mean, I know now it's ridiculous. So I mean, how was it for you growing up? Was there a strong leftist agenda being pushed?
I wouldn't say it was pushed, but certain teachers weren't afraid to, shall we say, express their leftist thoughts, although they didn't necessarily shout down anyone who thought different. I see it more now. I used to be a college lecturer at one point, and I have witnessed it on many levels and in many places, shall we say. It's tough. It's tough out there because kids are taught a school of thought.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I hope that as they grow up and become rebellious teenagers, they start to question a lot of that.
As we all hope. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So the problem with the schooling is, of course, there is a fixed curriculum. There is such a majority, I think, of people who think a certain way that it really becomes a place where libertarians or people who aren't of the leftist persuasion self-censor a lot of the time. You know, and they're sort of hiding in plain sight because they know that their views will be unpopular with such a large number of their colleagues that it's wise not to express them.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, I could recount. I mean, we'll get into the Brexit conversation. I recently had a dinner party with a friend of mine in London, and London being a very strong Remain constituency, And I mean, full disclosure, I was definitely a Leave voter. I couldn't actually legally vote at the time because I wasn't in the country. I got my citizenship, but I didn't have an address, so I wasn't registered. If I were here, I would have been front and center for the Leave vote. But when I went to this dinner party, it's all, his friends and everybody's there and stuff like that. And he introduced one guy and he said, this is, I wouldn't say his name, and he voted to leave at Brexit.
That was his identifier.
Yeah, that was his marker, for the night. And I kind of said, yeah, it's got, it was, and I just said, well, I would have done the same. And suddenly the look on his face was like, oh my God, what have I done?
He obviously didn't know. That's the thing, isn't it? And I suppose that's the problem with becoming siloed. And to be honest, that's not unique to one side or the other. We can all do it, can't we? And assume that there isn't another point of view out there, or that the other point of view is quite clearly evil or wrong. So yeah, we have to be careful. And I was speaking in Cardiff a couple of weeks ago, and I expressed there, we've all got friends who voted Remain.
Yes.
Who have hearts of gold, who are good, decent, honest people, who really believed in their point of view. And we have to respect that there are other opinions. I mean, how can you call yourself a libertarian if you then only insist on one point of view?
Completely agree. Completely. So let's get into, well, first let's define your libertarianism, because according to our honorable PM, that's a radical term out here in the UK.
Oh, a completely right wing. I mean, so far right wing that they people who don't get it at all would equate us with, the likes of the National Socialists, even though we're not socialist and we're not nationalists.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is there, of course, people try and describe it on this spectrum they've been taught to believe in their whole life, that there is only one axis, and on one side you have the left, and the other you have the right, and sensible people have to choose between the two options. But actually, when you analyze it, you can talk to Edward G. Griffin about this. He observes very wisely the whole spectrum that they offer you there is socialist.
Correct.
You've got the left, which are the international socialists or communists, and then you've got the right, who are the much more sort of nation or national socialists, but they're all socialists. If you explore the welfare state policies of the left and the right, they're identical.
They're the same. Correct.
So they are collectivist and socialist. The only difference they have between them is who is in charge and where they want to draw the border.
Correct. So how would you define libertarianism outside of that spectrum? Like, what is the definition you would give to somebody who's new to the concept?
Well, the first thing I do, and I was really honoured to give a talk in a well-known public school, which shall remain nameless, about libertarianism last March. And I drew this on the board. I drew the left to right, and they all understood that and probably thought that they should exist somewhere on that left-right spectrum. And then I drew the other axis. That's right. Yeah. The missing top to bottom, where at the bottom you have the authoritarians, and at the top you have the libertarians. So what we're saying is this ain't about left or right as much as it is about you being free. And if you're a libertarian, you can be left or right if you want. The difference is you're not using the state to force your preferred behavior on everyone else. And that's really what it is. If you're authoritarian, left or right, doesn't matter. What you are really trying to say is the state is a cosh, it is a hammer, it is a gun to force everyone else to live your idea of utopia.
Correct.
Whereas if you're a libertarian, you go up to the top and you're like, I'm not trying to force you anywhere. I believe this, I'm going to live this way. Off you go. You pick what works for you.
Correct. You do you is the common phrase.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So like a friend of mine tried to, I don't know if you follow Tim Pool. He's kind of independent journalist. But there was that same axis. I mean, the Americans do it upside down. So I think it's economic freedom on the horizontal and authoritarian on the middle, and they put the authoritarian at the top. But it's the same principle. And somebody did a cartoon trying to like define the four quadrants. And I don't know if you're familiar with Antifa and...
Well, I know of them. I don't frequent their clubs, but
I mean, obviously, have they protested you yet? So they were trying to suggest that somehow the left libertarian was in the same camp as Antifa. And that was a stretch because, again, Antifa is very authoritarian. They're trying to force a way of life and censor people and stuff like that. So the way I'd say, yes, there is the ANCAP side of the libertarian side, which is those people, very small state or no state, as some would go, the Rothbard button. And then I would, yeah, exactly. And then I would say the left libertarian is probably more of the hippie commune that they're just smoking drugs. They're just, they're sharing everything, all voluntary. Would you say that's right?
That's definitely the caricature. So if you're taking your 4 quadrants and having one picture in each,
yes,
that's probably pretty close.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, and I think as I say, the main principle of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle.
Yes.
As long as you're not forcing people to do, whatever through coercion of the state, you're a libertarian. Yeah. And I would say most people are. Would you say that?
I think they believe they are, and then they suddenly have this cognitive dissonance come upon them when they go, oh, but what about? And then they list all these very noble causes, all right?
Yes.
And they are noble causes. How are we going to make sure someone who is homeless doesn't freeze tonight?
Good question.
Yeah. How are we going to make sure a child with poor parents gets the medical care that they need? Good question.
Yes.
And it's all of these things. And then suddenly they decide that rather than do it themselves, organize, create a charity, create a charitable hospital or whatever, they
friendly society.
The best idea is to pick these untrustworthy people. I mean, let's face it. All right. The reason they're saying this is because they don't trust ordinary people to go and do these good deeds. All right. So out of all these other people they don't trust to do the right thing, they pick probably the 650 odd least trustworthy. That's unfair. Among those 650, there will be some very trustworthy people. But you know what I'm saying? In order to get to the top of a government, you have to be a certain kind of person. And to do that, you're probably not the kind of person that you really want to put in charge of the big red button.
Correct.
So what we're saying is the people most craving power, the people most craving authority over the lives of others, we then decide they're the ones we'll give all the power to make all these other untrustworthy people who won't be nice to poor people be nice to poor people. And what could possibly go wrong?
Clearly.
I mean, that's history tells us, doesn't it? Just go and read your history book.
I mean, that's exactly it. And I think the perception that the government is noble and has people's best interests at heart is probably the biggest facade, that's been pulled over our eyes. So, I mean, completely on board with you. That was my philosophy. Would you say there's any major difference between the libertarian movement in the UK versus the US? Just to touch on that briefly.
Well, I had the pleasure of meeting Jim Lark last autumn, maybe winter. He was a former member of their NCC. I think he might still be have a role there. And he happened to be in the UK on personal business. Young Libertarians coordinator Harley Dalton set up a meeting with him as he happened to be in the country. And we went for basically a roundtable chat, in a nice place in Manchester. And it was really interesting to hear his first-hand account of the Libertarian Party over there, including some of their more outrageous moments and what was really going on and that kind of. But I suppose one thing that I've noticed just by reading about what's going on over there in the news and things is they have been a little bit infiltrated by groups that are a bit more statist than probably some libertarians here might prefer to be. Now, perhaps they've just thrown the net a bit wider because, libertarianism is a broad church, isn't it?
Yes.
You could say in the UK that at one end you've got people who are only just not Tories. All right.
Right.
They're classical liberals, and they really, 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 really want to make sure that the least well-off in society get the help they need. They're perhaps struggling to come to terms a little bit with how you do that without making the state force everyone to do it. But that's where they are. They've taken the step. They've stepped out of the Tory party and they've gone, you know what? The Tory party isn't the party of low tax and business and freedom anymore. And as the Tory party moves left, they stay still and they find themselves in this space where the classical liberals are hanging out. And so that's one end of the libertarian spectrum. And then you go all the way to the other end, and it's like you said, it's the ANCAPs or even the full-on anarchists.
Right.
Absolutely no structure at all that isn't done by private agreement. And somewhere in the middle, you have everyone else. And I'm probably somewhere in the middle. But I suspect what's happened in the US is there's a lot more people at the statist end. You know, you only have to watch the election where that didn't necessarily go according to plan. And probably a lot of libertarians here were listening to these speeches and tearing their hair out going, you're not a libertarian. But that's what we do, isn't it? That's our hobby.
It is.
You get two libertarians in a room and there's one thing they'll agree on is that there's only one libertarian in the room.
Yeah. The infighting is hilarious. I mean, part of the podcast network I was involved in was one of the biggest US podcasts for libertarianism. And we couldn't even agree in like the private chats about, you know, different things. But I again, my philosophy is live and let live. All right, you present your argument, I present mine. People kind of meet in the middle.
Yeah. And we're all experts on splitting hairs, you know, over the minutest details. But from my point of view, let's worry about splitting those hairs later.
Correct.
Right now, you look around, we're not in anything like a libertarian society.
Correct. I think
there's a huge chunk we can all agree on. Let's work on that.
Yeah. Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller.
Oh, I love that guy.
Yeah, he's great. I missed him in London. I've got to catch him next time he's here. But he's an ANCAP, and he had that exact same conversation with like another libertarian candidate. And he says, you know, we probably disagree on a lot. And Penn was like, no, we could probably work together for a full generation before we reach the first disagreement over policy.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be the attitude for anybody freedom-minded. There's more that we agree on than disagree.
Absolutely. And in that vein, you know, let me apologize to any of my American libertarian friends who think I've just denigrated them. I really haven't. You know, it is that spectrum, isn't it? And the thing the US libertarians have that we don't is longevity. And they've been around for a lot longer than we have. And they've blazed the trail ahead of us. And we can learn so much from them. And we're great friends with them at the international level. We're members of the IALP, and so are they, and various other libertarian parties in the world. So, you know, forgive my tongue-in-cheek references there, American friends. We're all on the same team.
That's it. So I want let's kind of touch on the Brexit. We're on the countdown. I think it's 30 or 40 days left. I'm not exactly sure.
I can tell you exactly because on our website we've got a counter. There we go. Let me see if I can find it. It will tell us 7 weeks, 2 days, 4 hours, 40 minutes, and 17, 16, 15.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so I want to hear the process. I wasn't here when a lot of this was proposed. And I think it's fair to say this would not have happened without the UKIP advance and Nigel Farage.
Correct, yeah.
Basically getting the Conservatives to adopt that policy because they were losing power.
Mm.
And then, of course, David Cameron made the announcement. And where were you when the announcement was made for the referendum?
I was at work, I expect. And I was probably too distracted to notice that he'd said it. But, you know, where did this begin? Oh, it began decades ago. It probably began soon after 1975 or whenever it was, when the vote to remain in the EC, because it was so dastardly the way they took us in the first place.
Yes.
And there were people then who would have recognized that. And this has been stirring for a long, long time. I don't know if you saw that Channel 4 film adaptation of the Brexit campaign with
no, I did with
Cumberbatch, and there's lots of license taken in there, right?
Right, I wasn't going to watch that in a hurry, so.
But there's one line in there where the actor playing David Cameron is like, these guys have been campaigning for years, and we've only just started campaigning, like a few weeks ago. And that's the thing with Brexit, because it began as a anti-democratic movement. It was always meant to be anti-democratic. When you go back and do the research now, and all the lies and the stuff that has been pulled out since we went in, and we went into don't forget, a common market, and we woke up one day and it was trying to be a federation with its own army and own currency and a central government that you can't elect or unelect. And we think, well, how did we get to this point? So over the years, as they have tried to force, there's that word again, state equals force, government is force, trying to force this vision of the future on everyone. And they've never really got an explicit, yes, we want this, ever. In nearly 40 years, never have they got an explicit yes, that we want this. Because the last yes was for a common market. Right. And every other treaty, certainly that the UK was party of, that never went to the people. That was signed off by prime minister after prime minister who sold us down the river and never asked us what we wanted. Because they knew what would happen. We'd say no, just like Ireland tried to do, and then they made them vote twice, and various others. So it's been started a long time, and then of course crunch time came. The UKIP advance, as you call it, absolutely brilliant. That party had to exist. This could not have happened without it, and with no elected MPs and one defector.
Correct.
They had enough pressure on the right-hand side of the Tory party that Labour might get in. That was what it came down to. And so David Cameron, under that pressure, said, I'm going to try and renegotiate.
Yeah, I remember.
Watch Theresa May try and negotiate, right? It must have been something like that, all right?
Yes.
But it wasn't so newsworthy at the time. No one was sort of plotting it day by day, were they? And then he comes back, been able to get no meaningful changes. We're going to have a referendum. You know what? You could feel the place breathe a sigh, couldn't you? And the anticipation. I don't believe it. I wasn't in Germany when the Berlin Wall came down. I was at school in art class. Yeah. I remember it being on the news, and they had the solidarity graffiti. It was like a symbol of freedom and liberty for the whole world. But when that started to happen, I thought, we have got to do this. It was like freedom grew from the tips of my toes and came all the way up from my legs and out into my chest and was bursting out, I had to not, I couldn't sit down and not act. Now, you were very kind and said I was heavily involved. I was just a foot soldier with the local Brexit campaign team, and I put countless leaflets through doors and things like that. And that taught me a lot about what it means to put in the effort. For every other election, what had I done? Easy to criticize the people talking on the telly, easy to read the leaflets and moan about your hated parties and feel proud about the party you like and all that kind of thing. And then go and put your X in the box and be cross or happy with the result. But this was different. It didn't matter what party you were. And that was such a great feeling.
Sure.
We had Labour, we had the Tories, we had UKIP. We didn't have any Lib Dems, but, there was this gathering of people who would normally be sworn political enemies, I suppose. And they all crossed the lines and came together on this one issue. We have to be free from, and I'm going to use the word, from the tyranny of the EU. And it is tyranny because you can't elect or unelect the people who have the most power.
Correct.
And they took us in without asking. They were fighting for sovereignty. You cannot do that. That has to be a crime of some kind. But anyway,
I mean, given the 1,000 years of UK, as a country, well, England and the UK and everything like that. Yeah, I mean, you guys gave us, a lot of the liberal democracy, throughout the ages and stuff like that. You guys really pioneered a lot of that, and it was exported through the Commonwealth and colonialism to an extent. But to see that idea of liberty and freedom, people wanting to trade that in on the Remain side. And I mean, there's no doubt that the Remain campaign was very aggressive as well. I think we're getting, I mean, again, I wasn't here. The state was behind it, of course, the BBC, heavily behind it.
Outrageous. They published that leaflet, £9 million on a leaflet with the government seal on it.
Yes.
Government had that little, lion or whatever and the little shield. And there it was, the government's, why the government believes we should stay in the EU or something like that on the front. And then on the back page, this will be your decision,
Yes.
Whatever you decide, we will implement it. Words to that effect right there in black and white. And I thought they've spent £9 million trying to tell us before the campaign, so it didn't count towards campaign costs.
Right.
Campaign costs. They had every advantage. Still not.
I mean, if you've got the media, and I think it's pretty much most publications in terms of newspapers, the government and everybody else, and for good reason. These people are on the EU payrolls, right? I mean, it's a gravy train for a lot of these people, so they have loyalty to the EU. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Dan Hannan explains it brilliantly. I don't know if you've ever read his book called Why Vote Leave, but it is an absolutely fascinating expose on what goes on. He doesn't say it outright, but reading between the lines, when you add up all the perks of working for the EU, whether you're an MEP or whatever, they amount to a bribe to shut up and let the system roll, because they are so good. He gave one example where he could fly to Brussels or wherever he was, which of the places, economy, in like EasyJet or something, might cost him a couple of £100. But regardless what he spent, they would refund him this huge amount.
Like a first class full package kind of thing.
Yeah. And, if you add all that, these are a lot of perks that are available to people there. And you can, on a human weakness level, you can understand why people might get comfortable like that.
Completely agree.
Very hard.
Yeah. I'm of the philosophy, look, if the government is going to be stupid and give away free money, I have no qualms with people who take the free money. Like, you'd actually be pretty stupid not to. I think you should try to take back as much as they've stolen from you, right?
So you pay tax and they're giving you some back. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you want to take advantage of a program and stuff like that, I exactly. And if the EU is paying these huge packages, I think there was Brexit, the movie I saw that came out, and they talked a little bit about that you could hire like £40,000 a year worth of staffing and a free Viagra, all the Viagra you can snort. And I mean, just crazy packages. I get it, but that's not in the people's interest.
No, exactly. So that's why I have so much respect for the MEPs who have stood up to vote themselves out of a job, basically.
Correct.
Respect to them. And I don't care what party they are, and I don't care, whatever else they've got going on. An MEP who is up there campaigning to be fired from their job so that we can have sovereignty returned to the UK. I've got respect for all of those guys. Bill Etheridge is one. We've got, and Dan Hannan, Bill Etheridge is a party member. So the reality is, so few were willing to do that.
Correct. And we understand, even to today, a lot of the politicians, even in the Tories, the Conservatives, supposed to be delivering Brexit, that is their retirement plan, right? You go off to Brussels and you become a lobbyist or some kind of thing, and that's your retirement.
Yes.
And those doors are going to start closing for a lot of them. So that is also the part of their incentive.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
So I think it's good to observe, though, because really what happens then in Westminster is just a smaller version of it. Right. I think people who are willing to look at the EU and how it works and all its flaws should now look very closely at Westminster and at their local county council and district council or city council and say, right, to what extent on perhaps a smaller scale is the same thing happening here? And
agreed.
We need to clean it up. Donald Trump would say drain the swamp, and it's a great analogy because
completely agree.
While a lot of people are drawn to public service out of good motives and because they are good people, it's also a great place for the less desirable who just want power and opportunity, a place where they can not be touched and do what they want. There are some people in this world like that, and people don't like to think about that. And I'm not going to suggest who in these places might be that kind of person, but we know they exist.
Correct.
Because you have to look at the history of the world to know that there have always been people who want to have power and authority over others, and they seek those positions to do it. And so from the Libertarian Party point of view, the EU and us leaving it is just the first step. Because we know that in order to have your sovereignty mean anything, you need to bring the power of the decision-making closer to the people. Westminster is still too far away from me in the Midlands.
Right, exactly.
And it's further away for the people who live up in the northeast.
Yes.
Who would dearly love to be able to set their own corporate tax levels so that they could attract industry. Maybe they'd set them at 0.
Possibly.
So businesses would go and build and invest there, and then maybe their employment problem would improve.
Completely. I mean, I want to get to the libertarian plan post Brexit, but let's keep to the.
Sorry, yeah, jumping ahead, mate.
Yeah, no, but you're spot on that, because so I was going to ask you, did you actually in your campaign? Because I the few people that I did speak to, they never gave me a proper answer. But did you ever encounter like some really legitimate Remain arguments? Like, that's something to consider.
I think the vast majority of arguments on both sides were legitimate.
Right.
What it came down to is, what were your core values?
Right.
So recently, I've only learned this in the last 2.5 years since the referendum, because it's not stopped, has it? The campaigning never stopped.
You're right.
Campaigning the whole time. As soon as they lost, it was right. We're going to do it again, or whatever. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, really? We can stop now. We've just had the vote. We're going to leave. Why are you still campaigning? And the Brexiteers, I think, were kind of caught by surprise. But to answer your question, what I learned over the last 2.5 years about that is that Brexiteers are from Mars and Remainers are from Venus, and they simply value totally different ideas. They have totally different worldviews, and this is why Remain failed to persuade Brexiteers, is because they were arguing from their own point of view, and that point of view just didn't matter. I'm sorry, you might as well argue that the shade of custard will be better in the EU, because I just don't care. Those things that you find so important and that you keep telling me over and over again are like at the bottom of my list. So they're not a reason for me to change my mind, and they're still not. And Remain is still making the same mistake, because they're repeating the same arguments that Project Fear, except it's getting more ridiculous, because apparently my BLT is just going to be a BT and things.
Yes, no food and super gonorrhea and the rest of it.
Yeah, that's right. And we're like, you know what? None of that trumps the real reasons we were voting. We believe we can deal with those things that you're calling impossible problems without the help of Brussels and Strasbourg, but we think we can deal with them. But I want my sovereignty, and I want Westminster to account, and actually I probably want to devolve it a bit further. You know
Correct.
what I'm saying?
Correct.
Totally different arguments. Remain's arguments were not answering the concerns of Brexiteers.
Correct. So, I mean, that's what I wanted to touch on. So, I mean, the one argument I heard, and it actually leads into what we'll get to, like the post-Brexit, like how you see things going, was the European Convention on Human Rights.
Yes.
And they said, well, that's kind of the closest thing we have to a codified constitution. Yes, but I mean, I don't know if anybody's actually read the European Convention on Human Rights. For every right, there's a part A, so freedom of speech is, permitted amongst people. But then there's a part B where this right can be removed if it's considered for health reasons or, whatever reason. So every right they give, there's a clause to take it away. Yeah. It's not actually giving you any kind of rights. And we will get to that, because I agree, the post-Brexit, what has to happen next, definitely we need to solidify a lot of those human rights.
But what you're saying there is a prime example of how certainly libertarians and your average Remainer sees the world so differently.
Yes.
Because, you know, I have some very good friends, left-leaning, delightful people, but they repeatedly post a particular meme about how the Tories are going to get rid of the Human Rights Act. And I'm like, well, when did the act come into being? In the 90s? I was born in the 70s. I'm pretty sure I had human rights before that act. Where did I get them? It wasn't from the government, all right? And this is where, again, it's the libertarian post-Brexit. We have to understand where rights really come from.
Right.
And we'll get onto that because it has
huge
implications for the state.
Yeah, it's a huge. I mean, it's the natural rights versus what is permissible. So we'll definitely. So back on the campaign,
yeah,
freedom bursts forth from you like a scene out of Aliens.
Yes,
and you get involved in the campaign. You're meeting people. Was this like the first major campaign that you were involved in, or you were doing?
Yeah, I'd never joined a political party before.
Right. Okay.
And I was only just really starting to discover libertarianism.
Okay.
In its proper way. I guess I was already feeling that I was, but I'd got a label for it. I was reading, Bastia and things, but yeah, I'd never campaigned on behalf of another political party before.
Excellent. So coming up to the big day, let's talk a little bit about the day. Where were you? Was there like a watch party for the results? and take me through the results.
I took the day off that we voted.
Brilliant. That's very libertarian.
Day of annual leave, right? Me and my oldest son went out with leaflets, and we leafleted a whole bunch of streets in the morning. The kind of get out the vote type message.
Amazing. Yes.
As many people in our neighborhood, and I just felt like I couldn't stop. I felt like if there was one leaflet I hadn't posted, that would be the reason that we didn't leave the EU.
Right. Yeah.
You might call it obsession, but for me, it was a passion.
Yes.
So I took the day off, and we did that, and then we went to vote. And I saw, you start watching the results come in, as they do, and it was like we're not gonna leave, because it really looked like it was going to be close, but we were on the wrong side of it. And I was so tired that I couldn't stay up to see the final result. And I went to bed convinced that we were going to lose.
Right.
And as I went to bed, I became very philosophical. I was like, we're going to lose. But here's what I'm going to do. If we stay in the EU, I will throw myself into building a libertarian EU. And that will be my new political
ambition.
Yeah, exactly. And then I woke up in the morning and I heard that we had won.
Oh my.
And it was like the entire nation breathed a sigh of relief. It was like you've been on a long hike and you finally take your shoes off.
Right.
And sit down and give your feet a rub. That's I was like elated and but also it was like someone had unlocked the door and the sunlight was shining in, and it was a really nice day in my part of the country. I was like, wow, we are free. Wow. And I felt like that for a few days, but I was absolutely shocked by the bitter, vile things that Remainers were saying. I was like, I'd never seen anything like it. I was like, wow. I went to bed ready to embrace the decision and throw myself into a new direction of politics. And these guys, it was like someone had robbed Christmas.
The Grinch.
And it was their neighbors that had done it to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. Now, I understand disappointment, but I guess I couldn't comprehend is why hadn't they gone to bed more philosophical, like to embrace the decision? So much anger. And obviously it's not stopped.
No, it hasn't.
But the going on and campaigning never did.
It's yeah. I mean, do you know anybody personally who voted leave? Maybe they've changed them. Have they changed their mind since?
I can't think of a single person that I know voted Leave who now wishes they'd voted Remain.
I can think of one in the party, but I wouldn't give her name away. But you didn't know anybody.
No, well, I mean, I know someone who voted Remain, but now wishes they voted Leave.
Okay. Yeah.
But not the other way around. I don't know anyone who wished. Actually, I wish we were still in.
Right.
But I voted Leave. The only people I know who wish we were still in are people who voted to be in.
Right. Okay. And I think that's kind of been the consensus. It's all been, I think given the treatment we've gotten from the EU since the vote, a lot of people who wanted to remain have kind of come to the line and be like, no, we got to get free of this. All right. So moving forward from the result, you've got your Nirvana experience going on for a couple of days.
Yeah.
Obviously, the BBC is not impressed, and it's the racism, xenophobia, all the isms start coming out.
Very thick white van drivers.
Yeah, the Luddites and exactly. And the youth, we've stolen their future.
Oh, yeah, I wish they'd seen the age of some of the people campaigning, in the area I lived. They were the youth. In fact, the thing that I like to point out is, I don't know if you know this, but anyone who's under 60 now, that was the first referendum they had on the EU in 2016.
Wow, yeah. Amazing.
Because they were too young to vote in the other one. And then now they're under 60, but they might be 59 and 11 months and 29 days. But the point is, this was their first time. And these people have the gall to say, "You old man, how are you stealing?" Like, hang on, mate. This is the first time they ever asked me.
Correct.
Can you believe that? Outrageous. But the other thing I like to laugh about is the ones they're calling old now, they were the young ones when they were
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, and just briefly, you don't have to get too much into it. You've got kids.
Yes.
I'm going to assume if they're campaigning with you, they were kind of on board. Have they got any backlash in the school system as a result of any of that?
I think they were a little bit. They were at college, so it was slightly different. But yes, of course. But that I think is because the school system's very left leaning. But he had said his piece. Respect to the teacher, didn't damage his grades over it.
Good.
They had a difference of opinion, but yeah, it was dealt with as it should.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. All right, so fast forward, Cameron resigns as he should have done.
But he should have triggered Article 50 first, right?
Yes,
that's what he said.
Fully agree.
And I will trigger the thing the next day. Why didn't he? After the experiencing some of the calling from the other side, the thing that upset me most was that Cameron didn't then go ahead and trigger Article 50.
Right.
Because then everyone would have been teed up. They would have been focused. They would have just had to get on with it. And instead, he took the coward's way out. Now, okay, he didn't have a leg to stand on, really.
Yeah, he had to go, ultimately.
Because he was a Remainer, he campaigned for Remain, and he understood that. Theresa May didn't.
Correct, which we will get to, yes.
Yeah. So, sorry, I butted in. Carry on.
No, which is exactly the point I was going to make, is that we ended up with Theresa May, who is currently our PM. She was a Remainer. And somehow, and you correct me if I'm wrong, this seems to be the bastion of UK politics, which is compromise. Nobody wants to take a firm position on anything. And they feel the middle road, you try to please everybody and not pleasing nobody, right? Like Machiavelli would say that, like, pick a side, because you'll just get resentment from both sides. Is that accurate? Is that like a staple of UK politics?
I think it is, and it's also it's a symptom of the way UK politics works, because of how policy is brought about through the two chambers and debated and amendments, and you have to draw a consensus at that point between 600 and odd people. But Brexit wasn't that kind of question. It was a binary choice.
Yes.
and you can't have partly out.
Correct.
That
You
wasn't
can't
on the
compromise.
paper.
As we've learned. Is there somebody you would have liked to see take the PM spot rather than Theresa May?
I would say almost any Brexiteer, almost
Right.
any. I hoped Andrea Leadsom over May. I mean, I'm not saying Andrea Leadsom would have been the ideal choice. Not sure who would either.
Right.
Maybe there isn't an ideal choice. But at least she was a Brexiteer.
And she worked in the city. She was a business person.
That's right. So I'm just sorting out my thing. The problem is, of course, with the way our system works, is we don't vote for the Prime Minister directly.
Correct.
In the US, who do you vote for? You vote for the president, kind of. It's through the Electoral College, but you know that their name's on the ballot, right?
Correct.
Whereas in this country, you go for a general election. Where's the Prime Minister? Looking all over the ballot, not there.
Correct.
You're voting for your MP, and it's the party with the largest number of MPs, or can somehow, with a coalition, form a government. They themselves, without any reference to you, at number 7, Acacia Drive or wherever you live, pick who the Prime Minister is. Correct. And they have pretty much presidential authority. All right. I know constitutionally our country's set up different. Queen's the head of state. But so what, right?
Correct.
If the Prime Minister says we're going to press the nuke button, the Queen's going to sign it. So it's the same thing. And what happens then is that we don't actually get to choose who has got the most power in this country. That's down to the MPs first, and then the party members, who are all paid up. And there's rules about who can be a party member and all of that kind of thing. So actually, it's a closed shop. Correct. Who gets to be the most powerful person in the country. And so the way they stitched it up with Andrea Leadsom and Theresa May, they whittled it down. The MPs do all the voting first, and then they take the last 2 candidates to the members.
Mm-hmm.
And just before the members got to choose, Andrea Leadsom steps down from the race. So Correct. It becomes a coronation. And it was all chosen by the MPs, which, as we now know, 70% of MPs are Remainers.
Exactly.
We all voted, but a tiny handful of people picked the Prime Minister that's supposed to get us out and picked a Remainer.
Yeah, and not the smartest move in let's refrain, because we don't know how it's going to turn out yet. Yeah. Let's see. Give me a brief word about what you thought of Corbyn through all of this.
Wishy-washy.
Yeah.
Look, Corbyn's not the person I would ever vote for. All right.
Fair enough.
And he has struggled, I think, with his own demons between, he's got one on each shoulder. Be true to yourself, which I think is to leave. I think Corbyn doesn't want to be part of the EU. And try and please all my MPs. Because don't forget, you remember what I said about how the party system works and chooses the Prime Minister? Corbyn's first loyalty, if he wants to stay party leader, is to who?
The party member. Well, the MPs, yeah.
Well, they'll pick first, won't they, before it goes to the membership. So,
correct.
It might be different in the Labour Party. Maybe Tories and Labour have different rules. But what I'm saying is his first problem is keeping the MPs under control. And they're all a big chunk of them are Remainers. So he's now at odds with the grassroots Labour people who are Brexiteers and the elected Labour MPs who are Remainers. And he's like, I know where my heart is, but my brain tells me that if I'm going to stay leader, I've got to do something else. And he's stuck. And that's why you get this sort of vacillating, indecisive sort of view of him, I think.
I agree. I think, he's been very ineffective. I don't think he's really put up much of a fight. He's just kind of going with the flow. The best thing that happened to him was the Conservative Manifesto. Would you agree? Would you say for the election that took place after? Would you say that?
Oh dear. Well, yeah. But it also says something about him when the weakest Tory party in a generation still gets voted in.
Still trounced him at the end of the day.
I saw a mirror, here of what was going on in the US. You've got Trump v. Clinton. Trump's doing some good things. I like a lot of the things he's doing. I don't like some of the things he's doing.
Sure, I agree.
But when I stand him next to Clinton, I think, yeah, I'd rather have Trump. But Hobson's choice.
Yeah,
and it was
really.
over here. Like, wow, a really weak Tory party still wins. Labour must be terrible. And over there, a really weak Republican wins. Hillary Clinton, just retire. It's over. You lost to Trump.
You would think.
If only they picked Sanders, you might have a socialist government over there right now.
At least Sanders was genuine. I have to say that. He may not have won, but he wasn't Clinton.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, so we're moving on the timeline. We've got a little bit of time. Well, I don't know how much time you have, so let me know if you do have to run at any point.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, so let's run straight into the Chequers plan, which was basically a Xerox of what was voted down most recently. So this was Theresa May's first attempt at negotiating with Brussels. Your thoughts on it? And how would you have approached the negotiations?
Oh, that's a hard one because I would not have traveled in that direction at all.
Okay, so let's start with what you would have done.
When it comes back to what you were saying, this was an attempt to do the old compromise thing that normally happens in the House of Parliament over a multifaceted piece of legislation, but this time with something that was a binary choice. And so what they ended up with was something that was Brexit in name only, Brino. All the worst parts of being in the EU with any of our decision-making stripped out of it, And so, whatever you think of Boris Johnson, he was right when he said that Chequers makes us a vassal state of the EU. I mean, why don't we just put ourselves in handcuffs and say, beat us, take our money, over-regulate us, because that was, it was, I cannot comprehend why Theresa May would think that was in any way suitable on any story other than she knew it wasn't suitable and she was doing it anyway for some reason which was not visible on the surface. Because to everyone else on the planet, it must have been obvious. That's not Brexit. It's worse than being in the EU. Why on earth would you present that? And so I have to conclude, either she really is incompetent, and let's face it, you don't get to that position by being incompetent.
Correct.
Therefore, it was a deliberate attempt to sabotage what Brexit really meant.
I think you're right. I actually did a video based on her press conference. And for she had very good rhetoric in the beginning, a no deal is better than a bad deal. And she was, talking tough. And she even put up with Labour saying, we want details of the negotiation. She's like, I can't tell you we're in negotiations. You got to play it close to the chest. Fast forward 1 year and we get the Chequers plan. And she puts it forward. And for the first time, you hear her say, it's this deal or no Brexit at all. And it's like, when did that even become an option?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a choice then between two versions of Remain, a really nasty version of Remain and an only slightly nasty version of Remain.
Exactly.
Absolutely unbelievable. Yeah.
She introduced this phrase, right, called the national interest, which is funny because I thought the national interest was Brexit, right? That was the whole point of the vote. But she added that layer. So she said, yes, she wants to honor the referendum, but she also needs to do what's in the national interest. That's political doublespeak, right? It's
political doublespeak for doing what I want to do.
Exactly. So it again, fast forwarding, it is struck down in it is the biggest rejection of a legislation in the UK.
But what's so fascinating about it is everyone's rejecting it for a different reason.
Which is true, which is very true. Okay, so I mean, we're literally on the clock. We're on the countdown. The deal is squashed. What would you have done? How would you have approached the negotiations, or if at all, with the EU?
I think the mistake was to send in David Davis, believing that he was doing an important and useful job, when really the whole time they were scratching something else together behind his back.
Explain that for the listeners. So I know what you're talking about, but yeah.
So David Davis was appointed sort of Brexit minister or whatever the title was. And yes, he went with his team to go and negotiate with the EU to try and see what trade deals we could have without being a member of that horrible bloc. And the whole time he was trying to make progress, what had really been going on in Downing Street rather than Whitehall, don't forget, David Davis, Whitehall, in Downing Street, Theresa May's got a parallel team set up who are actually writing what later comes the Chequers Agreement, a totally different agreement being written in parallel. And when David Davis sort of realizes that he's wasting his time, he's been sent on a fool's errand, and actually he's kind of a puppet show to make it look like something's happening, he resigns.
That's right.
And then what pops out is Chequers. Here's one I prepared earlier. You know, well, you thought you were the one preparing it.
Okay. So you would have said actually negotiate. You would have actually gone in and
but you would have been clear about your position. You would have said, this is what Brexit means. Yes. It means that your courts don't have jurisdiction here. It means we control our own borders. It means that any new regulations you come up with, well, we might buy into them, maybe like the ISO system works, or we might not. But that's entirely up to us. They're the terms, but we would still like to trade. Do you want to sell things to us so that we can sell things to you? And if so, what's the deal? And it would have been that simple. And if they played hardball on that, that would have been perfectly reasonable, because simultaneously, I'd be having the same conversation with Japan and China and Canada and the US and Australia and New Zealand. Do you see what I'm saying?
Correct.
I would have straight away been setting up offices in every Commonwealth country that we left, 40 years earlier, and saying, right, we're in business. Let's talk. We want to buy your artichokes or whatever it is that they're growing in the wonderful, in the tropics. They can grow them in winter. Well, we can't grow a thing. And we can still trade, but the real reason none of this happened is because the people who were put in a position to make it happen did not want it to happen. That's the bottom line. It's like telling your kid to go and rake the leaves, and they don't want to do it, and they spend hours sort of wafting them around the lawn and never quite creating a pile and picking them up and putting them in the compost. It's because they don't want to do it.
Which is ironic, because of the actions of the supposed Remainers. It seems like we're full steam ahead for the no deal Brexit.
Yeah,
and
that's a really good point made there, because it was the perpetual campaigning of the Remain campaign after the vote was over. Everyone knows since we got the franchise that the day after the campaign's over and we get on with it.
Yes,
except this time. You know what I mean? And so that provided what I would call plausible reason for Theresa May's attempt at compromise, because they were really playing this, Remainer backlash. Like, it was only, by the end of it, you would have thought there was only one vote difference between the two sides. You know what I mean? Yeah. And therefore we should have an almost, Remain sort of solution. But that's not how it works. But they use that as a mask. But what we since learned is that a lot of the news stories that they used, they were exaggerating the support. 1 minute it's nearly 750,000 Remainers in London. Next, actually it's more like 200,000 at tops. Yeah. That's still a lot of people, but it's nothing like what they were saying, because they had to spin it to make all the Brexiteers think, oh, people have changed their mind after all. That's the story they were trying to spin. I don't believe a word of it.
Oh, I agree. The media, I mean, I've seen corrupt media, and I'm coming as an outsider, so I always held the BBC as some kind of world-class reporting until I got here. And then I started to see it. And I think you and I were on a march once for Brexit.
Oh, yeah, last summer, yeah.
Yeah, and they didn't even report on it. They showed us by accident.
That's right. There was two marches. There was the Remain march and there was the Brexit march. And it was like our march wasn't happening. And then the television camera, the eye in the sky, was pointing at our march.
At ours, yeah.
And they were reporting on it as though it was the Remain march. And then they're like, oh no, we're looking at the wrong guys.
It was absolutely insane. I mean, the BBC has a lot to answer for. Let's just say that. But
Yeah,
because
well,
of because
it's
of
called the
now,
Global Broadcasting Organization, isn't it? That's the joke
yeah,
name for it.
exactly. So because of this, it looks like we're on our way to a no deal,
Yes.
WTO terms.
Yeah. I
So
hope so.
yeah, I'm with you. Is it going to be, cats and dogs living together, fires of hell and, total anarchy like our publications are saying?
Well, don't forget they promised that the day after the vote,
Correct.
and
Now
it didn't
the pound
happen.
did fall, but it
And
recovered.
then it did. And the interesting thing about that fall for the pound was that, even before the referendum was being talked about, Christine Lagarde was saying the pound's overvalued, it needs to fall.
I agreed. And it's boosted exports because it's actually been very good for us.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a fact, It just
Correct.
changes. It's like saying it's raining today. Now we'll behave differently and we'll have an umbrella, just
Correct.
respond to it and carry on trading in a way that's, appropriate to the environment. So they promised it after the vote, didn't happen. They promised it after Article 50 was triggered, didn't happen. And now, they're promising that it will be so dreadful that they've practically authorized, militarized police and martial law just in case, And I'm thinking, who's going to object? It's not the Brexiteers, because they're getting what they want. If we WTO, they're getting what they want.
Exactly.
So is it really those blue makeup wearing people that are going to riot and tear
Super
some
Europe
kids
girl
apart?
and
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's part of Project Fear. What we're on now, 5.0, Project Fear 6.0. It's just layering upon layering, isn't it, of hyperbole and the most ridiculous claims. None of this is going to happen because we live in England. You know what I mean? The last time anything like this happened was when a teenager was killed.
right.
And it's provoked such a backlash that there was rioting in the major cities.
Yeah.
But nothing like
Tottenham, I
that, I
think,
don't
yeah.
think, has ever happened over elections and ballots and voting. Probably since, way back in the early days when people were campaigning to get the franchise.
There you go. There you go. And so, I mean, obviously, you're on board with a WTO agreement, which for those who don't know, the World Trade Organization, the UK is a member, the EU is a member. And for all the trade deals, we basically go up to places like Japan and whoever had a trade deal through the EU and basically say, look, nothing's going to change. If you're okay with the arrangement you had, we'll just ratify it, and within a couple of months we could get the trade deals. But do you think there's any fallout from the WTO deal?
There's going to be fallout. There
Yeah,
always will be, because you are changing the terms on which things cross borders and things like that. But it's nothing like what people are gonna, what people are predicting. And don't forget, also with WTO, Nigel Farage was very careful to point out Article 24 there, I think it is, basically allows us to carry on our current arrangement for 2 years.
right. For trade,
So
yeah.
if I've understood that correctly, so there doesn't have to be the day after, we leave, the 30th of March or whatever. It doesn't have to be this nightmare, unless people just want to breach the way the WTO works and all of its rules and deliberately try and punish us. But I think that would be unlikely even for the EU.
I agree. It's not in their interest. As I said, we are actually such an important market for them because we buy their stuff, right? So punishing us, Germany goes into recession because they can't export the cars, and that has all kind of economic problems. And if they don't punish us, actually a couple other countries might look to leave, right? So that's not good for them either.
No, and this is why Chequers agreement was so important, and why I think it was a deliberate strategy, and that Theresa May was basically in league with the EU to bring it about. Because if you play all the chess games relating to this relationship now, the way it's changing between us and the EU has only one option: to make it so bad when people leave that they'd rather not.
Correct.
And for us, in reality, WTO is really quite good. not only do we, in reality, we are going to keep trading with the EU because of what you just said, and we're going to have all these other options. And there might be a bit of a hiccup, and certain companies might do less well, ones who had really geared up for the way the EU worked. But then they will adapt to work with other nations and trading with them, or other companies will do better. And overall, the economy will balance regardless. Now, people, when that happens, they will be pointing at all the businesses that were very EU-centric and how they're struggling a bit and saying, look what happened. And they probably won't tell us about all the new companies and trading that's going on, which will balance it, because that's just the way the economy works. So the real issue there is that I've forgotten where I'm going with this now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to point out one of the industries that I think might take a hit, which would be farming, right? I think the farmers, they've enjoyed a very privileged position within the EU, and when we can now buy from Latin America, South America, New Zealand, we could get beef and a lot of our products and stuff. I'll grant you that the farmers are probably going to take a hit, but they've enjoyed the benefits of the protectionist bloc for years, so that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, but I also think that because we will be buying less from the EU, they may find that they just change the things they grow. And
good point.
Because the reality is, at the moment, and the National Farmers Union will back this up, we are only self-sufficient food-wise up until August.
Okay.
If we were just to take all the food produced in the UK and then just, eat it at the normal rate, we'd run out in August.
Right.
And so there's that whole chunk of where we have to trade to get it. So I suspect through adaptation, there will still be plenty of things to grow and sell in the UK, but it will require the adaptation. That's the point.
Correct. And with that, we also get back the fishing industry, which is...
Yes.
Yeah.
I interviewed a fisherman on that, that march you were talking about back in the summer.
Yes.
I bumped into a fisherman there who was from, I think it was Dorset. And he was just telling us how ridiculous the rules and things were, and how the catch sizes are so tiny, and they just can't wait. Brexit the movie, I think, probably pointed at this as well. You saw these big warehouses where they used to be full of fish and trading going on, and there was 20 little crates in the middle of this huge warehouse where the deal was being done, and that cannot be right. And so it almost seems, and this is where a lot of Brexiteers sort of get their viewpoint from, like being a member of the EU was a very sly way of dismantling the UK.
Yes, I would agree.
And don't forget, right at the beginning, the whole plan was to have the UK as a member, but keep secret what the real intent of the EU was until it was too late for us to leave.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost at that point because of how much dismantling has happened, but we're not quite at that point, and we can leave and rebuild some of that.
Correct. And I think this is a big part of why the push for the EU army is front and center.
That dangerous fantasy, yes. According to Nick Clegg, there is no EU army. It's a dangerous fantasy. Literally 5 minutes later, here's the army.
Because if they can't keep the union together by the political means, they could do it by force, which is we saw this play out with the Catalonia referendum when they went for independence.
Yes.
I think there's some ramblings in the north of Italy. There's a province that's considering it as well. And that yearning for freedom, it's a very European tradition, to be quite honest. I don't think they could stop it.
Rebellion and uprising far better than the British.
it does take for the Brits to really... yeah. The yellow vest in France. I don't know if France is going to go first or if the Irish, but...
That brings me back to that point that I got lost on earlier.
Which
is that and that is going to happen because the other countries want to leave.
Yes.
And if we leave and have a good time, they're gone.
I think so.
And so the test game is they can't let us have a good time. And so that's why they wanted to lock us into Brino Checkers hell.
Yes.
So they're like, look what happens if you try and leave. You become our pet dog, which gets kicked every now and again. And so we can't allow that. We've got to just leave, whatever the changes are. We know we're capable of doing it. We're full of bright, intelligent, hardworking people. What else do you really need? You certainly don't need Brussels, whose art is to get in the way.
I mean, at one point, the empire was 1/5 of the world. If you can't handle, this country already has a history of dealing with the world. So it's not that far to imagine doing it without Brussels.
No, exactly. And only on our own native island as well.
Correct.
It's well within our capability. What I worry about, though, is perhaps our politicians think it's not within their capability. And
they have no one to blame.
Exactly. And let's face it, they have been blaming the EU this whole time. And I have a Remainer friend who's very astute. And he pointed out, a lot of these things that people blame the EU for, they're actually UK legislation, nothing to do with the EU.
Some of it is, yeah.
And my response was, well, perhaps part of the responsibility for Brexit then is the fact that they didn't say it was theirs and they were blaming Europe the whole time. So you can't
hold your politicians to account if you don't know where they're standing. Yeah.
Someone else. But now it'll all be from them and they'll have to be competent.
Correct. So this brings me into now looking forward into the future after the Brexit, button has been pushed. What do you see is needed? Like, okay, so day one, let's say we're on WTO and the trade is going fine. What is the next major push for the British people that you think we need to address?
Okay, from the British people's point of view, as a libertarian, removing the EU structure from off our backs is step one.
Yes.
The next step is to devolve power even more closely to the people. A friend of mine puts the analogy this way: the politicians have to live close enough for you to see the tips of your pitchforks
and torches. Yes,
they've got to know how close they are to sailing, a little bit close to the wind. So, from our point of view as the Libertarian Party, we would seek to take a sort of Swiss canton approach to the UK, by dividing it up into regions, each with their own government, but which are federated. Let the national government deal with things that are national or international, but at the individual cantons, they could set their own laws, taxes, in a way which allows them to be competitive economically, to respond to the makeup and culture of the people who live within it. Do you see where I'm going with it?
Oh, absolutely. By
bringing power closer to the people, a wise man once said, you can hold them more accountable and you can keep them solvent. Now, wouldn't that be two really great things for a government to be? Both accountable and solvent. Imagine that.
What a crazy idea.
Not been for a while.
Definitely. So, I mean, you would definitely think that the next big push. So, I mean, you already said when you thought you were losing the vote, your big political ambition was possibly to try and transform the EU. Now that you've won the vote, and it looks like, Brexit is going to happen. Otherwise, I think there really will be a revolt. What is your next political ambition? Is it to push for this, I guess, the constitutional side of it, to try and bring more democracy to the British people?
Yeah. Now, democracy is one of those words that means different things to different people.
Good point.
And if you take it as ruled by the voice of the people, I suppose it sounds harmless enough.
Not always.
Whether it's harmless depends, of course, on whether your state, your government, has any limits placed on it.
Agreed.
Because an unlimited government is basically an unlimited cosh that the winning majority can use on the minority.
Yes.
And from my point of view, that's unacceptable. So it comes back to what we were talking about before, which was where do rights come from? Because they certainly didn't come about in the mid-90s when the Human Rights Act came to the UK. All right, I had my human rights back in the 70s when I was born. So where did they come from? And if you look at a lot of political philosophers, certainly in the last century and the one before even, it's plainly obvious that rights cannot be created by government because government is a creation itself.
Correct.
Of the people. And therefore, the creation cannot be greater than the creator.
Correct.
And therefore, if the government has any power at all, it came from the people who made it. And therefore, the people who made it can only grant to the government the power which they already had. because they can't magic it out of thin air.
Exactly.
So, but they do, of course, because we have this structure of sort of parliament, which allows them to create powers for themselves as if by magic, which we could never have. Well, we could never have delegated half of the things government does because we didn't have the right in the first place. So in the UK, it's slightly different, of course, because it's grown out of a monarchy, which is the divine right of kings.
Yes.
And so they believe that they can literally do whatever they want. They draw their legitimacy from the fact we put an X in a box once every 5 years, but they don't assume for 1 minute that the source of their power is us.
Right.
You could almost say putting the X is you signing to say, I agree to be bound by whatever you say, because they're certainly not drawing their power from you, because you don't have the right to do half of the things that they're claiming the right to.
Quite
I
right.
don't know if that makes sense to people, but that's how I see it.
You're right. So, I mean, obviously you are, you believe that rights are innate, that we have those rights built into us already.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. That's the John Locke argument. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Of course. And that means there are much fewer of them people think they are.
I agree. I actually have disagreements with my friends about where, natural rights, as we call it, and where does it come from?
Rights and negative rights. And,
and privilege and all these different things. So you think this is something that needs to be addressed in modern day UK politics?
It does. And the way I would like to see it addressed, and certainly something the Libertarian Party is currently looking at, is to have an actual written constitution. Now, a lot of people believe the UK has a constitution, that it exists in various documents, Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, various other things. But in reality, modern legislation has overwritten a great deal of that. And so it's no longer relevant as far as law is concerned. Now, we can still believe in those documents, but the judge is still going to send you to jail at the end of the day, regardless what those documents say, if a piece of modern legislation lets him. So we need a written constitution, so we don't have to talk about the unwritten constitution of the UK, which people often do, which makes it very clear, not what are your rights, but what are the limitations on the government. Because if you look at the US, when the Constitution is written, the assumption is that you keep all the rights which aren't specifically, given to the state.
Correct.
That you keep the. And they mistake also the amendments. They think the amendments are granting them a right they didn't have yesterday, when actually they are reminders. Hey, government, you keep violating this one. So let's write it down specially so that you get it.
Correct. I mean, especially, I think in this day and age, the freedom of speech, I think, is probably the decay of that in the UK has probably been the most frightening thing that I've seen. The police showing up for tweets and, young kids posting lyrics.
You know what I mean?
No, agreed.
You talked about it, except there's a little line in part B that says accept.
Correct, which is completely subjective.
You decide you can't. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that is probably the most terrifying thing, and the idea that offense and thought can now be considered a crime.
That's right. So you say something which some people report as a hate crime, and the thing itself is not a crime, but it might be a crime if it was motivated by what they decide might be hate. Right. So something's only a crime because of what I was thinking at the time that I did this act. And it's outrageous. One of the first things I would do as the Libertarian Party is completely abolish the category of hate crime. It makes a nonsense of the principle of everyone being equal before the law, because not everyone fits into one of these protected categories. And so they're not equal before the law. There are different, what I would call artificial segments of society, completely arbitrary, deliberately created to cause this sort of divide and rule effect. We're constantly bickering amongst ourselves. To me, as a libertarian, I don't care what race you are, what sex, gender, sexuality, religion, none of that matters. To me, the smallest minority is the individual. And so when people say things like all blacks are, or all religions are, or whenever they use the word all, or this sort of broad encompassing brushstroke, I'm like, I just stopped believing it straight away. I'm like, really? All of them? You've met them all. And having interviewed them all, you've found them all worthy of your condemnation in this way. Of course, you're being lazy. You are collectivizing a group based on an arbitrary characteristic you happen to have picked from this list of things that you find annoying and decided that they're all the same. And the problem with hate crime laws, is that it does the same thing. It's got a list of categories. If you fall in them, you're in a privileged position of calling hate on anyone else who says something or does something you don't like. But if you're not on this list, then you're a special category that has less rights. It can't be right. It's not equal before the law. We've got to get rid of it.
I agree. I completely agree. I mean, the whole intersectionality and I guess what's called social justice, which I mean, justice used to be blind, right? It used to, the image of, the lady with the scales and she's blind. The whole movement of the intersectionality and the social justice is to remove that and assign privilege and special treatment based on race, gender, sexual orientation. And that is a complete perversion of what I would consider justice. We could probably do an entire stream talking about that.
Let's put a date in the calendar.
We will. But we are coming up on time here. I mean, you've walked me through. Is there anything that you're working on right now that you want to share about, and also let the people know how they can get in touch with you if they want to hear more, have you on their own interviews, and so forth?
Understood. Okay, so a few things that I'm working. I've got a couple of roles in the Libertarian Party. One, I'm the coordinator for the Midlands, so that's everything from the Welsh border right through to Nottinghamshire and Rutland and Northamptonshire, and sort of from just below Yorkshire right down to again Northamptonshire and down to Herefordshire. So it's quite a big area with a large population. So if you live in that area and you want to know about the Libertarian Party or even just libertarianism, you want to meet some libertarians, we often have meetups where you can come together, have a nice time, socialize, talk politics, even talk football if you like. I don't know anything about it, but I'll try, and you can teach me. And I would love to hear from you. So you can have my email address, which is dan.liddicott, Liddicott, at libertarianpartyuk.com. You can find me on Facebook. My name is Dan Liddicott Libertarian. That's probably the two best places to find me. And send me a PM. Say, hey, Dan, I've got a question about the show. I didn't agree with you when you said this, or I love what you said here. Just tell me, I'd love to hear from you. And if you're interested in coming to one of our meetups, I will tell you when that is. And what we're trying to do in the Midlands is build a base of like-minded people who think that the individual is the smallest minority, who wants to treat everyone else exactly as they would want to be treated, and to set up a government system that allows that to happen on a daily basis. Freedom. It's a lovely thing.
Fantastic. I will definitely put all of the links for your well, I wouldn't put your email, but we'll make a note of it, and I'll put links below for anybody who wants to get in touch with you. Dan, this has been an absolute pleasure. I had an absolutely fantastic time hearing your story.
Well, thanks for asking, and I'd love hearing from you as well. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
I hope so. And anytime you want me to come down, mention about the annual meeting. I think it's coming up in February. Is that right? For the Libertarian Party?
Yes, it is. So this is not a conference, and this is for members only. This is where we're going to vote on policy and things like that. It's the AGM. So all the members should have received an email to tell them where and what that's about. But it's a key meeting. Yes. And if you want to get involved in the process of creating policy, do join the Libertarian Party, because we're really interested in what the members have to say. We don't have big sponsors. It's a member grassroots party. And, you could have a say in what goes into the next manifesto. You won't get it this time. You're too late. But we'll have an AGM every year. So by all means, come along.
Fantastic.
Join us.
Fantastic. Well, again, for all our listeners and viewers, I do thank you all for tuning in and taking the time. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Get in touch with Dan and any of the members at the Libertarian Party in the UK if you got questions. I think there's a Libertarian Party in Scotland as well.
Yeah, they're a different organization,
right?
Different legal entity, but we obviously share a lot of common values. And if you're a libertarian living in Scotland, by all means, feel free to get in touch with them, of course.
Yeah, we don't want to leave anybody out in the union. You know, we want to make sure everyone can be involved.
Well, that's right. And we also have the Libertarian Party in Northern Ireland and also in the Isle of Man now. So,
fantastic. That's great stuff. So once again, viewers, listeners, thanks you again for tuning in. As always, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. Do get in touch with the people in the Libertarian Party. There's a great bunch of people, and I have the privilege of calling many of them very good friends. So yeah, thanks again for watching, guys. Take care.